All right, welcome to another episode of Resiliency Rounds with Anish and Jeremy. We are in Nicomachean Ethics, talking in book 5 about justice. We are trying a new format, which we tried last time, and we got really good feedback on it. Thank you for those of you who shared your feedback with us. It's we're going to keep going with that kind of framework. And yeah, so we are in book 5. Anish, you want to give us a little summary of what we talked about last week?
Absolutely, Jeremy. Again, I wanted to say thank you to everybody who gave us the feedback. And, you've changed our episode a little bit. We have a question that we're going to pose and we're going to discuss that question, a question that's pertinent. I think feedback is really key for us. When we started on this journey, it was a very organic journey. We just wanted to spend time and talk about philosophy. That's what Jeremy and me like to do. Weird people as we are. That's the fun part for us. But once we noted that there are people interested in the conversations we were having, and the fact that we have this responsibility of sharing our intellectual heritage, the great conversation, the great books of the Western and the Eastern world. Once we got a sense of that responsibility, we were like, we want to do more and reach out to more people. Please, if you're listening in and if you like what you hear, if this is helping you, please let us know. Give us a review. You can rate us. There are 5 stars apparently on podcasts. Even if you give us 1 star, we will take it. But please tell us why and how we can improve. Without further ado, we are here in Nicomachean Ethics. We started this journey with the Platonic works, and from Platonic works now we've come to Aristotelian works. And in Aristotelian works, the Nicomachean Ethics stands out. It is a lecture series delivered by Aristotle to future heads of state, princes. Alexander heard these lectures. It is about how does a person who has a philosophical constitution, that means is a wise person, how would that wise person then go about and build a wise republic? How could he spread this virtue of justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom amongst the people of that republic to create a virtuous republic? And it starts with what does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to lead a good life? And how a good life is the product of walking in the direction of virtue, those cardinal virtues that we just mentioned: justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom, which is in our logo. And when you're following in the path of those virtues, you find yourself on the good life. And we've already discussed temperance and courage. Now we are on justice. Justice is a quite a difficult concept to wrap your head around. It is both an intellectual virtue and an appetitive virtue, but it's one of those virtues that is probably underpins every activity of a good human being, because it pertains to how one behaves with their neighbor. And so justice, what we discussed in the last episode, was more about how most of us look at justice in the very conventional sense, about following the law. And Aristotle talks about the law of the land, and how the law of the land in a virtuous republic would also be in line with virtue. And so if you follow the laws, you'll be a virtuous individual. But it turns out necessarily that doesn't necessarily turn out that way. Constitutions of various republics across the world today are not necessarily based on virtue; they are based on other things. And so, for a virtuous individual, a just individual, the bar is set very high. Just going over the low bar of following the law is not enough. One has to meet the high bar of being a just individual. So, Jeremy, what is the question for this episode then?
Yeah, thanks, Anish. So the question for today is, what does it mean to be a just person, a just corporation, a just state? And we'll start with kind of explain what just, however we define just and unjust, but then we'll apply that to kind of the outwardly, which is more institutional and corporate and state, and then go inward. So with that, what is a just person, corporation, and state? Anish, how would Aristotle define what is just?
It's a great question, Jeremy. So, it probably serves us better to take a slight step to the side just a minute here and go over the justice as Aristotle defines it for a population, that is, people who are part of a republic, and then justice as it pertains to the inter-individual transactions that occur in between two individuals. So there is justice from the standpoint of the state to its citizen, and then from between two individuals. So the constitutional justice, according to Aristotle, is making sure that people are given what is due to them, and how it determines what is due to them is based on merit. We had asked last time if we really believe that merit is the right way to choose whether one person should get a larger share of the constitutional goods. And the goods, from a constitutional perspective, would be those that form the base of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you guys have heard of this, is physiologic needs like health and sleep and nutrition, and then the next layer is social security, job, money, and then there's relationships, and then there is self-actualization that's kind of built on top of this pyramid. So the bottom layers of social security, health, education, this is the responsibility of the state. And so we believe, I think Jeremy would also agree, that those kind of goods should be distributed equally, and they should not be based on merit. What I mean by that is, Aristotle believes that that some folks have higher merit than others. So folks who are wiser, who are more honorable in certain constitutions like oligarchies, people who have more money, people who have more status in democracies, these are folks who are considered to have higher merit than others. And so they end up getting a higher proportion of the goods. Now, I'm not saying that Aristotle is advocating for that. I'm just saying that he says it's based on merit. I look at the world around me and I agree that it looks like a lot of those goods are shared based on merit. Shouldn't necessarily be that way. And so constitutional justice, then, I believe, is more that a state should be giving people what they need based on what they lack, as opposed to based on what they have. Now, I have that sense. A lot of people don't. They believe that if someone is really contributing to society, they should be given more than people who are not contributing to society. I think there are many different ways to look at it. But if I'm looking at justice from a constitutional perspective, I think the state should protect the weakest and not worry so much about the interests of the strongest. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that it's a challenge. In the ideal world, I think that it would make sense for the state, if it were just, would be providing equal. And those who need it get it, and those who don't benefit in other ways. But in my mind, it comes to, well, what is the purpose of the state, if not to serve the public, the people? And so, the challenge of in the society we live in today. I mean, I just read today that the owner of Google is spending like upwards of 60 million in California to market against the billionaire tax initiative, right? It's like he's spending 60 million in advertising against having to pay taxes, and so I don't know. It's certainly complicated and complex, and yet, for the purpose of state, in an ideal society, I think it's very clear of what the intention of the state should be for. If we're all paying in, I guess, I don't know where you stand on, like, if they're not a contributing member to society, can we lift them up so that they are a contributing member of society? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's an interesting thought, right? So what does that opportunity look like? And someone would say that if you were to provide to somebody the basic foundations, that is good health, education, social security, they will find themselves contributing to society. And I think that there is a thought process, though, that there are people out there who even, no matter how much resources they get, they will squander it away. Yeah, well, maybe that is the case. I don't know, but I think in a majority of the people that I have come across, I found them to be hardworking people who want to do good, people who don't want to be getting a handout. Now, again, that's just my anecdotal view of this, but I don't think I'm alone in that. I've really very rarely come across a person of wisdom who believes that there is that good should be distributed based on merit. From Jesus Christ to Gautam Buddha to to Nelson Mandela to Mahatma Gandhi. I don't think anybody believed, or Martin Luther King. I don't think anybody believed that to be the case. So I would rather agree with them than come up with my own ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the caveat there, which is you mentioned that's the challenge, which is for people of wisdom,
Yeah,
they consider a wisdom,
yeah,
believe it should be a certain way. And I tend to agree. I think that most people don't want to necessarily take advantage of the system. But if the system is providing without expectation, without clear expectations of what you get, or if a system isn't providing the support to actually say, we'll give you X, but we expect Y in return, there's something there where we don't, as a culture, we don't set expectations very well. And then when it's so big, like it is in our state, it's hard to keep controls on how you even create an expectation. I'm sure they exist in some way and fashion, but how you without making a big government, like huge government, of having oversight into all that. I don't know.
yeah. Honestly, I'm not saying that this is an easy question to answer, and equity gets very hard to define. And so all that being said, I would say that what constitutional justice becomes kind of a proportionality conversation. That means if A is equal to B and B is equal to C and C is equal to D, then A is equal to D. It's kind of proportions. Whereas the inter-individual justice, that is, if you and me get into a voluntary agreement, like we start a company together, or we decide to do an endeavor together, those and it how do we determine who keeps what of the profits that we make? I think that is more kind of based on equality. What that means is, if you put in $1,000 and I put in $1,000, and then we make $100 in profit, then I keep 50 and you keep 50. It is equal. Now, whether you are a meritorious individual and I am just a snake, doesn't matter. It is equality there. It's got nothing to do with merit. It is not proportional. It's kind of equality.
Sure.
And the problem becomes in criminal situations where you and me are not in a voluntary agreement, right? How then? What is justice in that situation? So if I attack you and steal your money, right? Or worse, cause violence. Like, if I take your money, that maybe the restitution is give you the money back. If I end up causing harm, like break a finger or an arm or whatever, then it's not an eye for an eye, right? Like, there used to be a justice that way. If you look at what was it, the Hammurabi's tablets and stuff, it was eye for an eye kind of justice. If you steal a goat, well, you get your arm chopped off. It's probably not eye for an eye. It's worse. But that was the kind of justice back then. Like, like a goat probably meant a lot to people back then than an arm did. But
Right.
if you poke someone's eye out, they poke your eye out, and that. Now we know now that is not the right way to mete out justice in that individual to individual sense. I mean, pretty much there's if you look at the laws of the land, one doesn't meet the same fate that one ends up committing, the crimes that one ends up committing. Like, if someone ends up, is hard, these things have happened, like people who have end up mass shooting, it's not like they end up in a firing squad. That doesn't happen. And so it it's no longer necessarily equality based justice, but what justice is trying to do in that situation is trying to make up for the loss. But what we found is it's very hard, right? It's very hard to make up for the loss. If someone loses a loved one because of a violent act, whatever you do to the criminal doesn't make up for that loss, right? And so, what do you think about societal justice that way? Like, we know so we have the opposite problem as well. Like, people are put in for years in behind bars for small minor offenses based on their race or based on so many different things, right? We are also putting people to death And some of these folks we don't know if they were necessarily in the right state of mind when they committed the crimes that they committed. And I don't know, what do you think about that? What do you think about that kind of justice?
I think moving away probably from eye to eye for an eye is probably the right thing. And yet I think it depends on the severity of the act too. And I mean, I come back with a question too of, is the death sentence, is that unjust in and of itself? Like like a life for a life, like is that an unjust act, or is that equal justice, right? I mean, that's where there are people who have been, to your point, incarcerated since the 70s for a bag of pot. And, it's probably because they were a person of color and not because they were a white male. The white male may have gotten a slap on the wrist, right? Like that is not equal justice. Again, I was just talking about this yesterday. There is a person who is clearly mentally ill. They're currently determining whether or not he should get the death penalty for the acts that he committed. The acts that he committed, we don't even need to get into the details here. They're so atrocious that it made me question my beliefs in the death penalty. Is it at that point? Is that even like a person like that? Do they? This is a different topic, I think, but it comes to, is that justice to them end their life because of it? Because of their crimes, they were clearly also mentally ill. They also have a history of being abused as a child. Like their whole history explains why the act happened. It happened. And there was mental illness. They were on the spectrum. They were abused sexually, physically.
Yeah.
And they created a monster. They created an act. But it wasn't. This person knew exactly what they were doing. It was premeditated. There was planning involved.
Yeah.
Is the death penalty in this scenario just?
Yeah. So at least what we are discussing here is the fact that this is so messy.
Yeah.
It's very hard when it comes to justice to say for sure what a state should do and what acts are unjust acts. What acts are then just acts? I think one disclaimer we should make is that when it comes to the state acting on a citizen or two citizens engaging in a voluntary transaction, those are as close as you can get to a rational act. That means they're logical. There's some logic behind it. In those transactions, it behooves us to do what is as close to the right thing to do, because there is a natural justice that exists in the world. There are certain things that you don't do, and they are not written down in any tablets anywhere or any constitution, right? There's something that we all know intrinsically. What is it to be a good human being?
Yeah.
And those things can be done. And similarly, there are certain things that a state should do, because I don't think that that natural justice dissipates when you talk about a state. A state is not a natural thing. It is a voluntary thing. It's an artificial thing, but still, it is something that it can act in a natural way. So there's some things that should be done. Now, when it comes to though the violent parts of an inter-individual transaction, there are two issues here. One is an irrational person. These are psychotic people. These are sociopaths, psychopaths. I mean, these are pathologies. Hence the name path in there, right? I mean, these are pathologies, but they are not they're not thinking about things logically. It is extreme bad luck to come upon people like this, because if one does, they meet a terrible fate. It's just It's just bad luck. But majority of the world is humans are not psychopaths. Majority of them are logical creatures. And so our discussion about what is it to be a just individual or a just corporation or just state, it is underscored by the fact that we are talking about a rational being.
Yeah.
And not an irrational being.
Yeah, we're not talking about the outliers. I keep bringing it to the outliers of the extremes here, but that's a good distinction there.
So now when we talk about a rational individual is one, and there are many definitions of it, but the highest definition of this is someone who knows the difference between good and evil. Now, a rational individual knows the difference. The just individual chooses to do good, right? The unjust individual chooses to do evil. I think the same thing is true for a corporation.
Yeah. No.
When it comes to the state, because the state is formed voluntarily, as it is being formed, those decisions are made. The people who form the state are considered rational individuals. They know what is good and evil, and if they choose evil, they create an unjust state. If they choose good, they create a just state. It is a choice. What do you think about that?
It brings up an interesting thought, as you mentioned that, which is, the idea of a two-party system that we have now is not something that was encouraged. I don't remember who said that, which famous thought leader had said, don't set up a two-party system because it'll never work. It'll tear apart the country. But I wonder if we actually are set up in a just state now, or if we're actually living in an unjust state at times where there's a shift away from democratic states across the world, right? There's more autocratic nations that have come into play. The percentage is there. And I actually just read an article about this, that there's an increase in autocratic states. But the idea around setting up the system in the state to be just, and it's set up by just individuals, even at the time that the U.S. was set up, I think there's the ideal, and then there's reality. I mean, the system was set up by slave owners with these philosophical ideals in place, and even the philosophers who were talking about this were slave owners. So it's interesting how maybe that's what were we saying about Aristotle being elitist? Yeah, thank you. And this is kind of an example of that. Like, isn't it nice for me to say, as the white man, like, oh, we live in a just society?
Yeah.
And that I get, it's easy for those who, for the majority, to be able to say that and have different privileges that the others don't have and don't experience.
Yeah. So see, that is the just state concept, and I do agree with you that states can change, but the opposite is also true, that rather than devolving into a tyrannical state, there is a version where a state can actually ascend into a philosophical constitution as well. And what that requires is for each individual in that state to be given the opportunities to be able to self-actualize, to be able to become wise. And for that, one has to have those bottom layers of that Maslow's hierarchy met. Majority of the population should have access to good health, education, social security, relationships, all of that. And then they could ascend into this space where everybody can then be rational beings who know the difference between good and evil, and they end up choosing good each time. That is what Aristotle is trying to say when he says a just republic. Plato believes that it is not possible for you and me to go out there and change the third person. All we can do is change ourselves. And if everybody in a republic changes themselves to be this rational being, then you will have, in effect, a rational republic or rational state. I think the same thing is true for a corporation. A corporation is just like an individual.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, if we shift to corporations and institutions, I have a couple of examples here, right, of different scenarios.
Mm.
Boeing 737 Max.
Yeah,
Was
boy.
that failure, mistake, injustice, proper? Was that, the FAA self-certification process? Does that create or cover for negligence versus the opioid crisis where Purdue Pharma is marketing OxyContin for decades, deliberately knowing what they were doing, like what they had and the damage it could cause? Like, is that injustice at the institutional level versus Boeing 737, which is more product of the system and more around negligence versus like, was that intentional or is that just was it not necessarily? Where does that fit in terms of just versus injustice?
Fantastic, fantastic question, Jeremy. And I don't know I should know it, but I don't know the particulars of the Boeing controversy. I do know a lot about the Purdue one. But before that, I think the bigger question here, and which will answer this question, is what does it mean to be just? What is the difference between performing a just act and being a just individual? I think there are acts that are just, but just because someone performs a just act doesn't make them a just individual. So what I mean by that is, and when I say I'm saying what Aristotle means by that is that in order for a person to be called just, performing good acts, performing just acts should be part of their character. They choose to perform those acts. Those acts are not performed out of chance, and they're not forced to perform those acts. They choose to do it. And the reason why they choose to do it is not for their own gain. They choose to do it because that's the right thing to do. And they know that it's the right thing to do because they have lived life. They have thought about the actions that they take, then performed those actions, and then learned from the results, and then reflected on that and modified their actions each time. That thought, action, reflection cycle has happened over and over again. And over time, they have gained the wisdom that is needed to choose the next right thing to do. They have knowledge of both the general good and of the particular good, and they go ahead and choose to do that. Right? It is a very high bar to meet. And most of us, first of all, most of us don't even know that concept exists of the thought, action, reflection cycle repeating over and over again and learning in each step along the way, changing one's approach to life. Of those who know to do it, they have to do several such cycles in order to get there. And of the ones who get there, there are some who live long enough to be wise in many different fields. And so it's a very narrow group of people. Most of us can at least be worthy of that. And that is what this whole process is. The Foundations of Moral Obligation course is what we are doing. And the reason why you want to build a foundation for your moral obligation is because when you undertake the moral obligation over time, it changes your character, it makes you a better person. Now, what that means is just because someone ends up doing an act, not knowing the particulars, not knowing the general character of what that act is, or doing it for reasons of convention, doing it because you want to keep up with the Joneses, showing up at a charity ball and auctioning just because your neighbor sees you do it, or because you like the thing that's being auctioned, and then, or happening by happenstance, It's like that guy on the joke, my dad's joke about the guy in the river who's drowning, and there's a loud splash from the bridge, and this guy falls into the water and saves the man and brings him to the bank, and everybody's cheering after this guy who jumped from the bridge to save the guy, and he's like, "Forget all that. Who's the guy who pushed me into the water?" I mean, that guy. So it's like that guy is not a just guy. He didn't do a good act. It just happenstance or accident or that he ended up doing it. Or someone puts a gun to someone's head or says, "Do it or else. Do this good task." Like community service after drunk driving. Those acts or whatever you do, it doesn't make you a good person. Those acts in and of itself are just acts. All those acts that were done, though out of compulsion, though out of chance, though out of ignorance, the act itself is a just act, but doesn't make the actor a just individual. Same, by the way, same thing is true to answer your question about Purdue Pharma.
Yeah.
Same thing is true for injustice. If one commits an unjust act out of ignorance, or out of by chance, or out of compulsion, we don't call that person an unjust person. Like, just give an example. If you're driving and you make a mistake and you end up hitting another car, that's an accident. We call it an accident. You don't get your character doesn't get judged based on that, right? Same thing is true. We now even know addiction is kind of like that too. Like addiction is a quirk of genetics and all of that. So you may end up you may be inebriated because of being an addict and commit an act. We don't necessarily call that person unjust. Similarly, if someone puts a gun to a loved one's head and says, you need to go do this bad act, otherwise, or else, and you do it, no one is going to say that you are an unjust person. Right? But a person who chooses to create a medication that they know has a very high addiction potential and go out there and market it and tell people that this is not going to get you hooked onto the medication, knowing full well that that's exactly what's going to happen, and go out there and tell primary care physicians and everybody else that, look, this is going to be wonderful for your patients, knowing full well the results. Like, what is good and evil, and you choose evil for the sake of profit. That is injustice.
It is. Yes. Yes.
And if one is an individual who is otherwise choosing to do the right things, but ends up causing an accident, it doesn't strike his doesn't put a strike against his name. Suddenly, it's not that if Mahatma Gandhi ever got into a car wreck, it's not that he's an unjust individual suddenly.
Sure. Sure. So, can a corporation be just or unjust as an entity, or is it the people within it then who are it? And I think Purdue Farm is a good one. I think Lyft and Uber right now, who both knew that there were sexual assaults happening by Uber drivers to their customers and chose to not change their hiring practices or put cameras into mandate that cameras are in cars or improve their technology to have a push button, right? They had these options. They chose not to and said, this is a cost of doing business. Is the company therefore an unjust corporation or institution versus there are people within that made that decision?
That's a great question. Look, I don't know necessarily if every company can be judged on the basis of whether it is just or unjust. So give me an example. Like, I'll give you an example. Maybe it's not. Well, maybe it's not the best example. There's a company that makes razor blades, Harry's or something like that, right?
Yeah, very sure.
Yeah. Is Harry's a just company? Is Lululemon a just company?
There are B Corps. There's this idea of a B Corp certification now. which is exactly that, though. It's actually, if you go and you qualify for a B Corp, Patagonia is a B Corp certified company, for example. I would argue that they are just. In order to qualify to be a B Corp, you need to be actively environmental, like all of how you make your products, how you source your products. They have to be environmentally friendly. They have to be, everyone within the organization has to be paid a living wage. In many cases,
Okay.
the employees are also either part of an ESOP, like an employee-owned organization, or have some type of real share in that. All of their decisions are made in some sense with being just in mind. Now, that's not how they are looking at it necessarily, but they are. It's just packaged differently.
Well, let me put it a different way to you, right?
Yeah.
Say Lululemon, right? Say Lululemon. I don't know if it is, right? I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. But maybe it's a B Corp. But at the end of the day, it makes yoga pants.
Right. Right.
I don't know if look, if they are a B Corp, fantastic, good for them, right? Same thing for Patagonia. Congratulations, right? But so what? My point is, so what? Like, what is? I'm not a big. Like, I'm not saying that I'm a. Maybe people like to wear Patagonia, but it doesn't change the world for me. Whether the Patagonia existed or didn't exist, it doesn't necessarily, change the state of the world in any way, shape, or form. So I think there are companies out there where it matters. And there are companies out there where it doesn't matter. So what kind of corporation you are, it matters, right? So let me put it a different way. Meta or OpenAI, Google, right? BP, one of those oil companies, right? I think Apple. I think there are from hospitals to educational institutions, universities to I think there are places in the world where it matters a whole lot more because it has got more to do with creating those bottom layers of the Maslow's hierarchy than yoga pants are.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, every entity exists, but their institutions exist, some that actually have purpose that benefit society, some that produce, like you're supposedly providing something that's going to help people, knowingly that it didn't. They're institutions that have power, and that power, if used incorrectly because of what they do, it's not Lululemon's yoga pants, right? But it's pharmaceuticals. Anyone that's providing, like car makers, they can cut corners or they can
Yes.
choose not to, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so if their responsibility is there, then they have an opportunity to be just or unjust.
I'll tell you, like you bring up a good point. Like Toyota Production Systems is probably the best production system out there, right?
No.
Toyota still has recalls. That doesn't make Toyota an unjust company. That is a mistake. That's a chance. Despite doing everything, they find themselves where they miss something. As opposed to you go out there and create a product that you know is going to get teenagers hooked. And then there's a chance that they're going to have low self-esteem and then they're going to go kill themselves. And you know that. And you still go out there and push for it.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about that. And now, who drives that? Is it one individual? Is it several individuals? That's a different conversation. But my point is that there is a difference between an unjust act being committed and someone who is unjust. There's a difference between a just act being done and someone who is just.
And I think we just answered that at the institutional level too.
Correct. We answered
So,
that at street level too.
yeah. So, all right. So if we move now to the inner, you mentioned it's great. So, if we can use an institution to actually help us segue into the inner self here. But I just want to point out, so you mentioned this thought, action, reflection, right? And we've talked about that before. And we've talked about vertical development before too. And we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the top of the pyramid for Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. if you are lucky enough to reach that point in your development, you're probably living a just life. You are probably a just person. I think in order to get there, one needs to be able, there are different levels of vertical development, and in the center where most of us sit is what we call like the expert or the achiever. In those stages, even the redefining stage after that, there's still opportunities.
Jeremy, if I don't want interrupting you, for the sake of the audience, can you describe the stages again for the vertical?
I could, maybe.
From
Uh,
opportunist, it's opportunist, diplomat,
Opportunist, then diplomat,
expert.
then expert, then achiever, then redefining, transforming, and then alchemist. And
Okay.
now alchemist is probably maybe 2% of the population, maybe less. Opportunist and diplomats are very early stage functioning. It's truly all about me and what I can get. It's kind of fight or flight responses. This is where you might see more narcissistic type of behaviors, especially in adults, where they can do no wrong and they believe that they are the greatest thing that, that ever existed with no proof, or when everything is saying suggesting otherwise. The expert is a person who's still focused on themselves, but and how in the corporate world, how are they climbing the expert ladder? They are becoming the expert. Like you're a cardiologist. Like at some point, you spent the time to truly become the expert in cardiology, right? And
Right.
be a practitioner. Then that's where a lot of yourself, where your identity comes from. The achiever starts to recognize that they can't necessarily do this on their own. There's more to it. There's you're there. You need to work with others to really make this to make something else happen. But you're still kind of going and trying to kind of climb the corporate ladder, redefining as recognizing that it's a lot of this is about sense making. You start to recognize that there's both and scenarios here, and that there's more of a we, and we need to be working more to collaboratively and transformative. And it's kind of in a stage where all of a sudden you are recognizing that there is an us and that we cannot be doing this, that it's not about me anymore. It's not about you. It's about all of us, the collective. It's more societal thinking and community focused and less and no longer focused on ourselves. And so you see, as I'm kind of just even describing someone, it's the most basic level of me describing this, how one becomes more just over time. Because at the expert level, you still might be making some decisions that are unjust to others because you're seeing them as a benefit to yourself. I'm not saying that you can't be an expert and be just. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying you can absolutely be both. But the wisdom comes with realizing it's no longer about you being an expert anymore. It's about what can we do together versus I.
Yeah, I could push back a little bit and say, for the sake of what Aristotle believes and what Plato believes, that if justice is a voluntary act and one has to be wise in order to perform voluntary acts, then it is probably true that experts are not just. They do perform just acts, but they're not just because they don't possess the virtue of justice because they've not had the wisdom.
I like that. Thank you. That's good. Yeah. So bring this back to the inner self. I just want to point out some of that because I think it's important with this video as we start to focus in on the inner self and then onto wisdom too. Beyond that, let's use meta you brought up. Meta has an algorithm that knowingly harms adolescents. Adolescents that are not developmentally, like their brains aren't developed enough. It's created addiction, not just in adolescents. It's created addiction with all of us humans.
Yep.
What do we, when it comes to the self and looking at being just and unjust, can we be unjust or just to ourselves? And using examples like being addicted to social media, being addicted to internet porn, being compulsive gambling, even though you know the odds are against you, but yet you still do it anyways. These are unjust actions
Yeah.
that we're doing to ourselves. Like an anorexic person who has an eating disorder. Another example, like they might want to eat and choose. It's an illness, but so is addiction. So we're being unjust to ourselves in these scenarios. When there's another rational part of ourselves who recognize that these things aren't just, but we're doing it. And then the other side of us is doing it. So it gets to the devil on one side and the angel on the other. It gets to the Hydra that we've talked about in the past,
Yeah.
the three-headed monster.
Yeah. Yeah. So if, to frame that in a question,
Yeah.
justice as it pertains to organizations, to the state, to the laws, to individuals, is how one commits acts that affects another. But the question you're asking is there something like self-justice? Can one be unjust to oneself? Can one be just to oneself? I believe that, again, this is based on my readings, right? The Platonic works, the Republic talks about justice as it pertains to oneself. And what that means is that when, as one is making choices that affect one's own life, one can choose to do things that bring about momentary pain. And with knowing that momentary pain would actually lead to longer term happiness. So when I say momentary pain, it'd be like saying that, there's donuts in front of you. You want to eat the donut, but you don't eat the donut because you know it's not good for you in the long run. So who is telling whom not to eat the donut? It's like you are telling yourself. That means there is a part of you that wants to eat the donut, and there's a part of you that knows that that's not the right thing to do. Both of those are Jeremys.
Yeah.
There is a Jeremy in a hierarchical state. There's a Jeremy that controls the other Jeremy, and the Jeremy that controls the other Jeremy is what in if it's ordered the right way, in a philosophical mind, in a person who has wisdom, the rational principle, which is the part of the brain that knows the difference between good and evil, that controls the honor seeking part of the brain, which wants to do the right things to gain honor, who then controls the appetitive elements, which with the elements that only want to do the things that make itself feel good. So the rational principle is the smallest part that controls the larger part, which then controls the largest part. And the analogy there was the man controlling the lion. The lion controls the multi-headed chimeric monster. The multi-headed chimeric monster is the appetites. We have appetites that are multitudinous, millions upon millions of different wants and desires. And if we were to go out there and just spend our time participating in those desires, you have like a rock star lifestyle. And rock star lifestyles usually end in terrible addiction, terrible suicides, death, and so on and so forth. Right? That is the argument against following a life of pleasure. It's a tyrannical life. It's a tyrannical existence. Right? Honor seeking is what most of us end up doing. We tame the chimera because we don't want to come across as people who are just taken in by appetites. And we do that because we don't want to be seen as somebody who's taken in by appetites. There's a difference between doing that as opposed to doing it for the right reasons. The right reason being because that's the right thing to do, because that is the just thing to do. That's the wise thing to do. If you do it for those reasons, then you're following a rational principle. So Jeremy, maybe telling Jeremy to not eat the donut because Jeremy wants to look good in a fitted shirt, which is the honor-seeking element. Jeremy telling Jeremy to not eat the donut is also because Jeremy knows that's the wrong thing to do because it creates a bad example for his kids. That's a whole nother Jeremy. So wisdom being leading that is the top of it. So now to answer your question, one can be unjust if one does not have this ordered republic in their minds, where the rational principle controls the honor-seeking elements, which controls the appetitive elements, right? Now, for some people, it's not a choice. If one is, like we talk about a rational individual has a rational principle that ends up saying, don't do it. But they haven't ordered their constitution where they can prevent themselves from doing that, right? Their honor-seeking part takes over the rational part, where they follow convention. They seek profit instead of seeking good because they want a better house, or they want a bigger car, or they want a better looking spouse, or whatever, right? And then there are those who are completely enmeshed in the appetitive parts, which are just driven by passion. And that's why they neither seek honor nor do they seek wisdom. That is most of us in the early stages, in those opportunist diplomat stages. I think opportunists are probably in those stages, right?
Yep.
And so those folks are folks who are, there's really no point having conversations about rational thoughts and justice and injustice.
Right.
As you ascend that vertical development, there's a time when that conversation can be had. Why do you choose to do the right thing? Because that's the right, because I want to be seen as the person who does the right things. I want to do this because I want a promotion. As opposed to, why do you choose to do the right things? Well, because those are the right things to do. I have more self-respect. Those are things that lead to a good life. I'm following the path of virtue. Those are two different individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think one can be unjust to oneself if one understands that paradigm and still chooses to do the wrong things. That is an unjust individual. And I find it very strange. It'll be very strange to have an individual like that who knows the difference between good and evil, but chooses evil for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is most likely people who are choosing to do evil to themselves are doing it out of ignorance.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's fascinating, the loop that's creating in my mind around inward and outward.
Yeah.
If you're, if you're ignorant there on your to yourself, I don't see how you could possibly be outwardly just to others.
No, you can't.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you can in a conventional way. You could just follow the laws and say, I'm a just person, which we now know that when we say someone who's just, that's a person who voluntarily chooses to do the right thing because they know it's the right thing to do and they're not doing it out of chance and not doing it out of compulsion. That is the definition.
Yeah. That's right.
That person will not choose to harm themselves. But you are right, it's a paradox.
Yeah.
The paradox is like a hunger strike.
Yeah.
You're causing self-harm for something that is beyond you. Mahatma Gandhi did it. Nelson Mandela did it. I'm sure, I don't know if Martin Luther King did it or not, but I'm sure he suffered many other ways. But my point is, you can choose self-harm. But the difference there is that self-harm that we are talking about is the disappointment you feel because you're not going to chew on the donut. It is harm to your appetitive side and not harm to your wisdom side. And definitely not harmful to your honor-seeking side. Like they say that only a good man can harm himself. That's why Socrates drinks hemlock.
Right.
You see, because choosing to not participate in philosophy, choosing to go into exile is harming himself. So he ended up drinking hemlock, which was the lesser of the two evils.
Which brings us to then wisdom as the way out. Right.
Wisdom is the way out.
Yeah.
Justice and wisdom are very tightly linked. I mean, so is courage and so is temperance. As a matter of fact, you need to have each of those to. You cannot be a person who is intemperate and cowardly and be wise. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work that way. No. 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 It's a path that one has to strive for their entire life, right? We've talked about that. Once you never truly arrive. Maybe you're on your deathbed, looking back and saying, well, I lived a just life, or I was courageous. There are moments in time, there are decision points every day that that you can choose to be courageous or temperate or just. And that all leads to greater wisdom over time. And we haven't tackled wisdom yet, but it is that this is all in the growth arc of development. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just because one commits one act that is unjust, otherwise they are just individuals, doesn't strike them out from the just pile. And just because someone commits one act of justice doesn't make them a just individual. It is all about a state of character. One has to do the right things, thought, action, reflection, every day, all the time. Yes, you can make a couple of mistakes, which you will. That's how you will learn on the path to the good life.
That's right. So we can leave with the question is, who is running your inner republic?
That's right. Who's running your inner republic? And it's a good point. Yeah. What would
Are they just?
The republic that we're talking about, that has the ordered republic, is the rational principle on top, honor in the middle, controlling the appetitive chimera. And if it's flipped the other way, where the chimera is ruling, yeah, that is absolute anarchy, right? If you have the honor seeking element that's ruling and it's not doing it with wisdom, you could be ordering on injustice quite a bit. Right? Choosing profit over good. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we see most of the world. The people that blame can be ascribed to are those folks who are seeking honor, and honor being profit, bigger house, whatever, instead of doing the right thing. The chimera, if the chimera is ruling, that is just an irrational being. There's no conversation to be had there. All of us who are honor seeking should ask ourselves, are we wise or not?
That's right. Great question. The wise one will say, I'm not that wise.
Wisdom is a very high bar. I don't think we should say that we are wise, but are we worthy?
Are we worthy? Great reframe. Yeah. Great. Excellent.
All right, Jeremy, this was great. Thank you so much again for a great conversation, man.
Yeah, thank you, Anish.